Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the webinar on science education in a post-pandemic world, brought to you jointly by United Women Singapore and KeyNote Women Speakers. I am Madhavi, Director at United Women Singapore. UWS is a local non-profit organization focused on advancing women's empowerment and gender equality through our programs and partnerships. As part of our advocacy, we launched the Girls to Pioneer STEM program in 2014 to encourage young girls to take up STEM in their higher education and careers. Since its inception, the program saw over 26,000 girls participate in its various phases. We focus on building partnerships with several organizations such as Cortiva AgriScience and Science Center Singapore. We conduct a live webinar session with a NASA astronaut, launched 2 research studies to understand the perceptions of STEM and career prospects among girls in Singapore. In the past year of the pandemic, we released a series of STEM at home learning activities made available on our website and also our social media. We aim to strengthen and expand our program to include topics on global warming, clean energy, water, sustainability, and many other exciting topics while making it available to a wider audience in the community. Today is also a special session as it is launched in collaboration with KeyNote Women Speakers, one of the world's leading directory of female public speakers, which aims to bring diversity to speaking stages around the world. KeyNote ensures that women are more visible through this platform and also train the next generation of speakers. I now have the pleasure of introducing our speakers. Dr. Tara Huber is a coach, speaker, STEM mentor, and the founder of Huber Coaching, which provides one-to-one coaching and workshops on mentorship and career management. She is a Harvard-trained PhD who has over 20 years of experience in scientific research and administration, including working with early career researchers, most recently at the Genome Institute of Singapore. Dr. Tara is the host and moderator for today's webinar. The next speaker is Dr. Sarah White. In her work as a speaker, facilitator, and ICF credentialed coach, Dr. Sarah focuses on practical strategies to positively impact people's personal and emotional skills. Dr. Sarah draws upon her years of experience in education and her academic credentials to support people and organizations in developing emotional intelligence. And finally, we have Dr. Lakshmi Ramachandran, Program Manager on the HBMS-funded Cancer ImmunoTherapy Imaging program at Duke-NUS Medical School. She holds a PhD in cell and molecular biology from the State University of New York in the US. And she is an active proponent of women's participation in science and has written and spoken on recruiting and retaining more women in science. So before I hand it over to Dr. Tara to start the webinar, just a quick reminder for all the participants to please use the Q&A box if you have any questions for the speakers. We will try our best to answer all the questions during the webinar. Without further delay, I would now like to hand it over to Dr. Tara. Over to you, please.
I think I'm on mute. Well, thank you, Madhavi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to share on the topic of science education in a post-pandemic world. I'm a leadership coach, as mentioned, to scientists, and I am a STEM mentor, which means I help scientists with what they're facing at work and in their careers, how to lead their research team, maybe how to get tenure, how to make that next career step. Now, I have had my own research lab, and I was also a research administrator at an A-star institute. So if you're counting, that means I've had 3 careers so far, and they're all connected to science. Now, science is all around us, from the vaccine that we're taking against COVID, the digital devices we carry, the way we generate clean water. Taking up a career in science means being a part of creating the technology and the future that you're going to grow up into. And it's about caring for the world. Now, you may be wondering, how did I get into science? So when I was a teenager, I liked field trips to national parks in Singapore, Malaysia. I enjoyed National Geographic articles, going to museums, and even stamp collecting. I also liked working with my hands. I liked making crafts and baking. And at the same time, I was good, very good at sciences at school. So biology, chemistry, and math. My personality was attracted to interesting details, to making connections and understanding cause and effect. You will have your own combination of interests, hobbies, and strengths at school. So when I was trying to consider what to study next, something I'm going to say now is true then as it is now, which is what we're curious about, what we have some talent and ability around, is a good indicator of what to follow. So interest and ability are two pieces to consider in making a decision. So it's really important to be driven by your own internal motivation. So I enjoy biology, like I said, because I was exposed to it at school. Whatever I learned about it and whatever I did around reading made me want to know more. So I went to a liberal arts college, Wellesley College in the US, which means I could take different subjects as well as major in the biological sciences. And I had a favorite subject, favorite class, which was developmental biology. That is the kind of biology that looks at how a fertilized egg develops all the way into a fully functional organism, an adult. Now, after my third year at university, I did a summer internship at the Harvard School of Public Health. This gave me experience doing research. It also gave me a connection to the school. And I found a faculty member there with which I could actually do my senior year project with. And that was a little unusual. Most of my classmates did that research on campus. But because I had that connection, I now had a faculty member that gave me exposure to the school that would ultimately be the place where I did my PhD. So I mention all this because I'm trying to share that the choices that we make to try out research and to create opportunities for myself set in motion some of the decisions I made. Ultimately, I went to Harvard Medical School to do cell and developmental biology. Now you will discover more and more about the direction of your career as you do it, as you talk to people and as you do projects. And the important thing is to keep asking yourself, am I interested and am I good at this? Now, I no longer directly do research. What happened? Somewhere it changed for me. Learning biology at secondary school is different from college, which is different from a PhD and a postdoctoral fellowship and being a faculty member. At each stage, there are different kinds of elements of works and different skills that come into play. So the biggest thing I found when I became a faculty member was I actually ended up not working at the research bench anymore. So the girl who liked working with her hands had lost something that she had found so enjoyable about science. That's me. Now, this is not everyone's experience, obviously, with being a faculty member, but the important thing was to connect with what I was interested in. And I saw that supporting scientists by being an administrator and by being a coach are ways that I can take the knowledge and experience that I have and use it to support the endeavor of science. So you will discover the career paths ahead as you go along it and ask questions at key junctions. So deciding to take a science degree is an investment in a possible future, a future where your scientific knowledge, skills, and thinking can be applied to different careers. Now we'll hear more of this too from our other panelists today who have picked up new skills and pivoted their careers. I'll be highlighting more points through our discussion, but would now like to hand the time over to Dr. Sarah White.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here today. And it's so interesting listening to Tara's story about her journey and her background in science. Mine was quite different. So all the way through school, I had to say science was probably my least favourite subject. Confession. I know I really shouldn't be here saying this, but it's true. It was my least favourite subject. Maths, I enjoyed. I was good at it. Science, I was good at it. I got the grades, but it certainly wasn't something that appealed to me. And I just said to the other, my colleagues on the panel here, if you'd said to me when I was 15, you're going to be on a panel talking about science education in, several years from now, I would not have believed it. What changed for me was my choice of degree. So my first degree was in psychology. And this really came about because I was really, really fascinated with what made people tick. What were our motivations? Why was it that some people struggled with stress and other people can breathe through that? How is it that, our social constructs are created? All of these things I found completely fascinating. And then when I started my psychology degree, I got such a shock because all of a sudden we had modules on neuroscience. And I was thinking, hang on a minute, I didn't sign up for a science degree, this psychology. But it really did bridge the gap between science and the social side of things, hence social science. What I found though was suddenly that a subject that had been not very interesting to me at school, when it was put in a context where it was applied to human behavior, all of a sudden I got it. I understood why it mattered. It gave me a deeper understanding of the surface level behavior, and I actually found it completely fascinating. So of my degree, all of those modules that drew on the science, so the cognitive neuroscience and how memory works, looking at addiction and drug interactions and how that affected neural pathways in the brain, and how different drugs operated on the nervous system. Again, found so fascinating. And nobody was more shocked than me when I found this to be the case. So it really was quite a revelation to me that I thought, hang on, all of these things that I learned at school, I'm now seeing how they're relevant to something that I'm really interested in. Same for the maths, I got there and all of a sudden we're doing all these statistics as part of our research methodology. And I remember at the time thinking, well, this is quite interesting, but I'm never going to use this again. I actually finished my psychology degree and went into teaching. And after a year or two of that, I was missing the academic side of things. So I started a master's in education, and lo and behold, research methodology, statistics all suddenly came back again. I went on to do my doctorate in education, and same thing again. So all of these skills that I got from my initial degree, which started right back in school, I've used the entire way through on the academic side in terms of getting a master's and a doctorate. Now, what's really interesting as well is that I've pivoted away from teaching about 6 years ago, and I now work as a speaker and as a consultant and a facilitator and coach. But my work really focuses on emotions and resilience. And you can imagine when I'm going into organizations which are full of data engineers or, people who are very, very factually based, they hear the word emotions or they hear the word resilience and they think this is a really touchy, feely, fluffy subject. So the value to me in the science is actually being able to take that application and show people how it's rooted in the way our brains work and in the way our bodies work. And so I'm drawing on science now in a way I never expected to be doing all those years back at school. So yeah, an unexpected journey for me, but one that I'm really enjoying. And I've even gone on and done a diploma in neuroscience as well, which again, I can't quite believe I've actually done. So I think it's worth considering, a science career doesn't have to mean, one very narrow field. Tara has already shared her experience of working across different disciplines. When it comes to things like psychology, you may end up working in a very clinical setting. You may end up working in a lab. You could end up doing research. But with psychology, there's also the human aspect of that. You may or may not know that Mark Zuckerberg has a joint degree in computing science and psychology. and just look at, whether you agree with it or not, the science behind Facebook likes and shares and the way that works. And you can tell that's been invaluable for him. I was a teacher. The role of psychology in that was absolutely brilliant, because it gave me such insight into the children that I worked with. You know, people who work in human resources, there are maybe people who want to specialize in psychology and go into educational psychology or organizational psychology. So again, just like Dr. Tara, I've pivoted in my career, and as an advocate for a psychology degree, I can really recommend it for a brilliant, broad degree, which draws in elements of the social, but also quite a lot of science and maths, because I just feel it sets you up so well for having a range of careers and a range of choices as you go through your life. We know now that people are not going to have the same jobs for their entire working life anymore. There's estimates that, you know, those people who graduate from school in 5 or 6 years will have multiple jobs and multiple careers during their working life. So for me, I have to say I'm so glad I did psychology. Not only was it something I found really fascinating, it's really given me an amazing foundation to build on. And when we're thinking about science in a post-pandemic world, the importance of well-being and mental health and looking after ourselves has become absolutely vital, not just on a personal level, but on a professional and an organizational level as well. So I'm really expecting to see a lot more people moving into psychology degrees as we navigate through the immediate aftermath and, of course, the longer legacy of the pandemic that we're living through right now. With that, I'll hand you over to Dr. Lakshmi.
Thank you, Sarah. I was really enjoying both your talks, Dr. Tara and Dr. Sarah. So one of the things that I caught from both your sharing is, and which highly resonates with me, is one thing is interest, whether you have it or not. And then along the way, awareness, self-awareness, of, oh, this is something that I like now. And then let me go ahead with that. A lot of revelations along the way. And to me too, when I look back at myself as a 15-year-old at that crossroads in having to make a decision on which career path to take, I think this is exactly what I used as well. So at that age, what I was very sure of was what I did not like. Like, for example, I knew that I loved biology, but I did not want to be a medical doctor. That was like a completely, no profession to me at that point. And when it came to other subjects too, for example, math, I didn't have much of an interest in math during that time. So by just knowing what I did not like, and by knowing, okay, what I really liked at that point, I was able to start focusing on what would be an ideal career path for me. So, so again, at that point, being a 15-year-old, I did not know that one could pursue a career in science per se. So I started speaking to people, and I was quite fortunate that even back then, I was fortunate to actually speak to a career coach who really opened up possibilities to me. So when I told her clearly that I love biology, I'm fascinated by the subject, and within science, like I was really fascinated by cells. Even in high school, I was so excited to just be able to pronounce deoxyribonucleic acid. That really excited me. So such things, when I shared with my career coach, she said that, why don't you look into the options of pursuing something in molecular biology or microbiology or biochemistry. So these were the options that were laid up to me at that point. So I didn't know anything about these subjects, but I had it somewhere that I liked the idea of being a scientist. And then I was able to convince my parents and move ahead with an undergrad degree in science. It was quite difficult to actually say no to medicine, because that was really the trend during that time. So I had to really stick to my intuition and my liking and move forward in this space. And what I realized eventually through my undergrad and my master's is that when you really know what you like and you stick to it, doors actually start opening up for you. So in the place where I did master's in India, there were a bunch of students already preparing for GRE and to apply for PhD in the US. So this is where I thought, oh, maybe I should just try it out. And together with my peers, I just prepared for the GRE and I wrote the exam. And by then I had an idea that molecular biology is really, really like my passion. That's what I wanted to pursue. So I can say that I spent a lot of time researching about universities that offered molecular biology, and of course, places where that would offer a full scholarship, because in order to support my studies, I was able to identify all of that. And it took a lot of effort to do it, but I was finally able to get into a PhD program in the US. So I did my PhD from SUNY Buffalo, State University of New York at Buffalo, and I was specifically interested in cancer research. So the institute, Roswell Park, and now it's called Cancer Center, was tied up to SUNY Buffalo, and I pursued my research there. So as Tara said, it is like sometimes, it's when you step into something that you completely understand whether it is really, the path for you moving forward. I always loved science. So the next question that came to me while I was doing my PhD was, I was quite convinced that I didn't want to be in the academia doing research. So, and then I felt that I really wanted to be at that, interface of industry, wherein you can see all the research that you do in the lab actually translate into something, some product, some drug. And drug discovery really excited me at that point. So I made a transition into the industry. I got a job in AstraZeneca, again as a research scientist, and I was extremely happy. I could see all of these happening. There was a lot of learning. It was exciting to be in the space of drug discovery. But then another thing that happened with me, and this is because life changes as you move along, and then sometimes your career choices also change according to life. Again, as Tara said, it's for me. For some people, I've seen people like in the same profession for, in the same space for years. So with me, I had to make some changes based on my personal situation. But because of my love for science, I was able to identify spaces in science where I could fit in. So the first choice for me when I moved to Singapore was to be a science communicator. So I worked in NUS as a science communicator in the field of mechanobiology, again, a completely new area, but I just loved learning about that subject and writing about it. And currently, I have moved into another space as a research administrator, quite like Tara, in supporting people's scientific research. And with all of these changes that I went through and all of the life changes, which has been quite grounding, I have finally come to a space of wanting to really support my peers and others through their career journeys. So, which is why I have also trained myself as a coach and as a mentor to support others' journeys. So, I just want to quickly share one thing. Which kind of sums up the fact that science is not just a linear path. In fact, there are tons of opportunities in science. It's not just the academic path. So if you look at the blue area here, this is a typical academic path wherein people start with their PhDs and they go on to becoming professors. But there are many other options. For example, if you look here, see there is this career development aspect, which even human resources, which Sarah also mentioned. And then right now, like what I'm doing as a project manager, program manager, which happens in both academia and in the industry, then moving on to even sales roles, people who are really good at sales. I know of many of my colleagues who've gotten into product knowledge, who had specific knowledge in that domain, becoming sales people within science. Now, this I think is extremely important. Policies, scientific policies, because if you really look at today's situation, COVID-19, I mean, I'm appalled by the fact that, decisions are sometimes made ignoring science, and this is just not acceptable. Because decisions, especially political decisions, need to be based on science. And this is the reason is because science is really the key to many answers that are not quite evident in situations like a pandemic when there's so much of uncertainty. Science actually provides the evidence and data that can actually help in making policies that people could follow, people in power especially could follow. So this is like something I think is very important and should be upcoming in law, intellectual property law, patents. This is already there, and of course even in finance and many other areas. These are some of the spaces where people can actually go into. So without belaboring too much, I would like to end by saying that there is no better time than now to really pursue a career in science, because if you really look at today's situation, the answers are really coming from science, from diagnostics to detect COVID-19, to vaccines to prevent it, and drugs to treat it. It's all based on scientific research. And as Sarah said, mental health is also becoming so important these days, and all these things have been addressed by different areas and branches in science. So I really hope that new generation really comes up, pursue science, and really, brings it up in a way that the power actually comes to science in many different ways. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for all of your sharing. I see that we have some messages that are really resonating between us. I am so curious and want to double click some more on some of those decisions that you made. I'm curious actually what the environments you were in and how they played a part. So what I'm getting at is the schools you chose. In particular, how did you choose them, and how do you think that influenced you? Either of you can take, maybe Sarah, take that first.
Yeah, so I think probably my first degree was definitely choice. I went to the University of Liverpool because it had a great reputation for psychology. At the time, it had, I don't know if it still does, but it had one of the leading forensic psychology units in the country. Mm-hmm. It had, it was part of the Russell Group, so it had the research status as well. And when I started my degree, I actually intended to go on to be a psychologist. So in psychology, just because you have a psychology degree, you can't call yourself a psychologist. If you're going to specialize, you normally will have to do a further master's or a doctorate specializing in a particular area. So at the time, I was like, this is great. This will give me a really solid foundation from which I can go and specialize. At the time, I thought I might do clinical psychology or educational psychology. But as time went on and doing my research projects in schools, I realized that teaching was what I wanted to do initially, and then maybe educational psychology, which didn't end up happening. My master's, my doctorate, I have to say, was more opportunity. I'd gone back to Newcastle, where I'm from, in the United Kingdom. And when I was doing my teacher training there, they had the opportunity to do a master's in education, which sounded really interesting. So I did that. And then they also offered the opportunity to take it on into a doctorate. So first degree, very much a conscious decision in terms of the school, the location, the reasons behind it. The master's and the doctorate were honestly opportunity and what was available at the time, and thoroughly enjoyed them nonetheless. I'm lucky that where I come from, again, it's a great university, part of the Russell Group. They're very strong on research. They always come out very highly in terms of student ratings and research ratings. So that was fortunate for me. But yeah, that was my kind of accidental stumbling into further postgraduate work. And I know Lakshmi's story was very different because her choices, I think, were fairly intentional from what she said so far.
Well, I just want to follow up on just how did teaching come in as opposed to continuing on in practice? What drew you to teaching?
So at the time when you were looking at being an educational psychologist, you had to have at least 2 years as a teacher before you could apply for the master's. That's not the case now in the UK, certainly. I pretty much decided educational psychology was what I wanted to do. And so I applied to be a teacher, did my teacher training, started teaching, and actually then really enjoyed it. Loved the school where I worked. It was a tough school, but amazing staff, many of whom are still my very good friends today. And every year I was like, oh, maybe next year I'll apply, maybe next year I'll apply. And I did actually apply, and I didn't get anywhere with it. I got offered, I remember, an interview for an unfunded place, which would have meant I'd had to pay all the tuition fees myself. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do this enough that I want to find the money to do it. And that to me was a real flag. I was like, right, this is not something that I'm really passionate about, because if I really want to do this, I would do anything to find the money to make it work. You know, I would have applied to other places. I was like, I'm only applying to Newcastle. I don't really want to move away. Again, if I really wanted to do it, I would have moved. That made me stop and think for a moment. And I actually ended up moving to Singapore with my teaching career instead. I was also doing my further studies. So yeah, the choice to do teaching initially was to go into educational psychology. And in fact, following teaching just took me on a different path, got me to Singapore. And I did my doctorate all around emotional intelligence and supporting third culture kids, which in an international environment is very prevalent, but it was a term I'd never heard of before I moved here. So it's again, you know, to Lakshmi's point, you have all these things that come up that you never expected and you didn't plan for and you didn't anticipate. But actually, looking back, I actually think, yeah, I've enjoyed that more and been more interested in that than I would have been in my original plan. So it's funny how things work out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lakshmi.
Yes. So as Sarah, as you rightly pointed out, mine was quite intentional to start with. In fact, until I got my PhD and my career change into the industry, it was all very intentional. I really believed in, you know, really planning, having a goal, really knowing what you want to achieve and moving forward that way. But it's quite interesting that the rest of my journey hasn't been intentional at all. It was mostly adapting to my situation and my surroundings and looking at what transferable skills I have, how do I fit into this, and then moving along, right? And then finding what's your sweet spot there. So in terms of like for the benefit of students here who are at a really early stage in thinking about their careers, I will tell about my intentionality part and how I actually chose how I got into it. So when I did my master's, now I did my master's from Madurai Kamraj University in India, which is a fantastic place for biotechnology related research. So that was my first exposure to real research. They were all scientists who have had like significant research experience from the US and the Germany. So the entire research culture and the environment was extremely stimulating. So even at the master's level, I remember with our projects, we used to have, our professor was quite, ambitious about our master's projects. And I remember like my first project was on what I came up with. So we were given the task of coming up with something very unique and in addressing a unique problem. And, I just loved sitting in the library with my friends, brainstorming and going to the lab at any time. And, I just loved it. So the idea that I came up with then was to design a ribozyme. A ribozyme is nothing but an RNA enzyme that can target the plaques, in Alzheimer's disease and cleave it. So it was a very ambitious project for a master's student, especially from India, but then we were able to do some work on it and show. And that really, I think, changed my whole perspective and want and desire to be a scientist. I just loved it, to have these hypotheses, to be able to demonstrate this. And also, as probably know Tara very well, like, there's always, science is also something that is laden with failures, right? I mean, sometimes your experiments don't work, and then you brainstorm around it and think about how you actually solve it. So I think that really calls for like a passion and interest and, perseverance. And that's what I think I took to my PhD also. So in terms of choosing the university, so I was very clear that if I wanted to study abroad, I needed to find the money to study. So, and then some of the realizations I had was that if you do a PhD program, then you have higher chances of getting a scholarship versus going for a master's program abroad. So, and then another thing which I did was like, because I had my friends, who had top GRE scores, but one of the mistakes they did in their application process was they applied only to top Ivy League schools, because of which they did not get an admission. Whereas I didn't have such a high score, But what I did was I spent a lot of time in contacting universities individually. Like I would go to their contact page, find the email IDs. I've emailed at least like, and this is back in 2000, 2000 guys, 2000, wherein internet was not so freely available. And I used to just have to go to, cyber cafes. We used to have cyber cafes wherein we could use internet. I used to spend hours there contacting, like I must have spent at least 100 emails to universities to see whether my GRE score is acceptable, what are their expectations from a candidate. And I did all this sorting, and finally I had enough money to apply to like 4 universities. And out of the 4 universities I applied, I got admission in 3 with scholarship. And this, I would say, is because of the extensive research I did in identifying what is suitable for me with my scores and my interests.
Fantastic. Yeah, what I'm hearing is that both of you, chose places that did impact your choices because of the caliber of people, the kind of emphasis, whether it was the strong psychology for Sarah and also the biotech, and that again, these things kind of help the decisions along the way. For my own self, I think as I shared earlier, having been in the proximity of Boston, having done an internship near Harvard meant that actually applying and getting into Harvard was actually a smooth process. And because of the person I worked with, so this is now bringing in elements of network as also impacting our careers. Who are our mentors? Who are people who have an influence in our life? My mentor was the first president of the Stem Cell Society, International Stem Cell Society, Len Zon. And he put me, when it was time for me to think about a postdoc, one of the people he recommended was a key person in the embryonic stem cell field. He recommended him very well, and I then went to his lab. So I was mentored, and I think this is actually a point I also want to make for all of us. I was mentored by men that were very supportive of women in science. This is kind of, again, where who we meet along the way also play a part in the development of our career. So yes, we are internally driven, but I think for the young girls out there, you're also getting advice and listening into people around us. And we also want to make sure we sort of get good advice, process that well, because you're also going to sometimes hear things that are discouraging. So in that vein, I actually want to look at this idea of, sometimes the career in science is not the career that girls are sort of maybe even supported in from their family perspective. We don't see still a lot of girls going into fields like engineering or computer science. And I would like to hear from both of you actually, if you ever had or encountered any kinds of resistance or challenges for being a woman in science and studying science.
I think from my perspective, psychology is a little bit different because there are so many fields of psychology where it's quite female heavy. So my degree, for example, was about 90% women and 10% men. But then depending on the field you go into, there's more men or there's slightly more women. But it is different to the more kind of traditional science subjects. So for me, it was very straightforward. There really wasn't any resistance. I had a lot of support from family. What I will say, just to add on to your point, slight tangent, but definitely my choice of husband was a good one in terms of supporting a career pivot. So you're talking about, being mentored by men, the life partner you choose as well, I think is absolutely vital in terms of supporting and cheering you on and helping you persevere when things are difficult and encouraging you when it's all looking a little bit bleak. So that would be my add-on there. Not so much around the degree and the percentage of people in my field, but more about the support from the person that you end up being with and potentially marrying. But I'll hand over to Lakshmi because I'm sure she can speak more to the women in traditional science subjects.
When I look back at the early times, right? So with family, I had 100% support. In fact, I'm very grateful to my parents who actually just let me travel to the US at a time when there were no like credit cards or cell phones. So I was just 20, 21 when I reached the US, and I'm really grateful for them to, for having let me actually go and pursue what I wanted to. In terms of uh, career, I mean, the journey per se with my PhD, I've never faced any kind of issue because I was a girl or a woman. It was like always, I just felt that as a student I was always treated equally. There were no issues at all over there. But of course, like later, like as Sarah said, it's very important because as we move along the path, then a lot of things change. So it's important to, like who you marry and all those things are also important, supportive people. And hopefully like the new generation are people, girls and boys who are educated enough to know that it's important to kind of pursue career as well as life equally. And I will just add a third dimension to it. So my kids are very supportive of, they're actually very proud of me being in science, and they're this 10 years and 6 years old. But I feel that having moved along this far, having gone through all of those like things like even career breaks and things, I'm very happy where I stand today, that I didn't give up on science and I've continued to pursue, because my boys are really proud that I'm a woman in science, and they're happy to share with their peers actually. Yeah.
Oh, that's very good to hear. Let me share a bit like what I've experienced as a woman in science. So likewise, I think both of you,
Yeah.
I had supportive parents. And so I think that's a big part of supporting women picking science. And I had supporting mentors, like I mentioned. I think what's important, of course, as we continue to carry on, is to continue to have mentorship and colleagues that we are able to go to support us in our fields. Because that is actually not always the case when we head into the workforce. Now, I hope that you girls, when you enter ultimately to work, that's going to be a different world. Honestly, when I went to school, I didn't think about it being weird being a woman in science. And I actually went to an all-women's college. So that definitely was not weird. And that played a part in believing that I belonged in sciences. But actually what did surprise me was what happened as I proceeded along the career. So actually, I think the tougher parts were when we became a faculty member. And then you see sort of maybe a change in the numbers of women that are there. And that's why we have sessions like this, which is we're trying to encourage more of these role models, women in the sciences, so that we are encouraged to see us actually move up if that is also what you want. Now, that means actually we have to always be careful about what we, who inputs information into us and how we continue on in the field. So my advice in this is always look for mentorship at every stage of your career. Always look for people who have your interests and your career interests at heart. And organizations like, well, there are women in science organizations, places where actually there you can find support, are very good for you if you are continuing. So in universities, there are sometimes women in science groups. These may be also, again, places to get that kind of support. Yeah, so actually I'd like to now think around the topic of why it's important for there to be women in science, and what do you think is the perspective that we bring, or why are we looking at making sure our numbers are better represented in the field? Maybe I'll start with Lakshmi on that.
Yeah, absolutely, Tara. I mean, it's been proven that diversity is important, and because it brings in, of course, diverse perspectives, which are much better in better decision making, and better teamwork, new ideas, innovation, and all that. So Tara, if you remember, we had organized the Gender Summit in Singapore in 2019, which was like the whole purpose of the summit was to was actually looking at science through a gender lens. So one of that is, of course, like one angle to that is promoting participation of women in STEM, because what happens is that one of the observations, and that which was actually published by UNESCO a few years back, is that although girls and boys start equally in their science career path, like even at the level of PhD, it's about 50% representation of both genders. But as career progresses, they see like more women dropping out. So why does that happen? And when that happens, because there is data and evidence supporting it, how can we stop preventing that from happening? Because as we just said, it's extremely crucial to retain these talented, brainy women in the science career force. So otherwise it's a waste of talent. It's simply a waste of talent, intellect, just not utilized, right? So it is important to address it. And one of the ways is, of course, through a lot of that's happening right now. I think people are more aware of it, is through organizational and policy level changes. But what I really stress on from, now having been in the space for a while, is to really change, I mean, the internal biases and internal, questions or doubts as we move along. That is what I feel needs to change. So, yeah, so this is where I think, we can play a part in really changing that mindset, and in letting girls also know that it is possible to move ahead in life, whichever way you dream about, but being very firm and confident about the decisions and choices you make.
Yes,
yeah.
Great. Yeah, Sarah, what would you say to a young girl considering going into the sciences? What either tips or skill sets in their thinking would you recommend for them?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that resilience is really important, because as Lakshmi pointed out, it isn't necessarily going to be a straightforward path. I mean, you've all heard our career experiences, which have had twists and turns that we didn't expect. We've all ended up being very happy with the result. So I think that's a key part, is having resilience. I think really being open-minded to potential careers you can have, and actually thinking about, well, where could this take me? And doing a degree which has, a broad application just opens up your options. And I think that's really, really helpful. Something I can speak to from my experience, just from, the perspective of doing further studies and postgraduate, which was part-time alongside a full-time job. And that was advice from my mum, which was really do as many of your qualifications as you can before you have children. And I know that's not specific to science, but I can certainly attest to the fact that once you've had very small children around, and sleep's impacted and all those kind of things, and it's probably not something you're even thinking about when you're 15 or 16 or 17, but to get your qualifications under your belt, for me, made such a huge difference, because it meant that I could actually take a bit of time once my very young children were here and actually enjoy that. I also think part of that, having those careers in science, again, being wise about who you marry, because women still end up doing most of the childcare and the work around the house. And I don't know, Lakshmi, if you find that plays into the kind of dropout rate in terms of science careers for women, but certainly it does impact things. So to really put those skills to use in your expertise, in your training, in your degree, just think very carefully about logistics and how this is going to work. Something for later on, perhaps, but definitely worth considering.
Yeah. Well, I like what you're sharing, that is it is possible to have a family in a scientific career, and that there is maybe some sequencing of when certain things happen, so that they they fit into your life. Maybe Lakshmi, is there some insight from your side of handling a family? I love that we have two women who have families here.
Yeah, I would also say that I mean, I would just go with the saying that like a mother is born when a child is born. So you pretty much learn about all that, at that point. And then I feel that in many ways I have learned to manage different things post motherhood. Things which I, like for example, pushing my potential beyond what I actually knew existed is happening now. So I don't, yeah. So from my experience and from knowing about like many others' experiences, I feel that it is possible to do it. Nothing is easy. Like the fact is that nothing is easy in life, so that is the expectation. It's like everything is challenging. So there is no, even like when I look at professions or professional levels, everything requires commitment, responsibility, dedication. So these are all things, there is no shortcut to it. There is no shortcut to hard work. So even when people talk about like being a smart worker versus being a hard worker, I would say you have to be both in order to be able to succeed in life, right? So I think if you go ahead with that attitude of like, really following up and through your ambitions, everything is possible. There is nothing that is really impossible.
Yes. Well, and I think actually by having various dishes in your hands as you juggle, it actually makes you a skilled person at sort of managing your time well and being very focused in your work. I think what we've been hearing right now is that it is possible to have a family life as a woman in science. And what you heard Lakshmi say earlier on about having women's perspectives and a diversity of views is very important. I think there's also this idea that leadership as a woman, so being in places where your voice can be, is also very important. Now, in science, I always say that, it's not a gendered mind so much that kind of comes up with insights, but we are social beings. We interact, the endeavor is social. And so when you have women missing out of the various layers, then we have that element that actually we bring, whether that's a more empathetic or more nurturing side. I'm not saying men can't be. Like I said, I was actually mentored by some very good men. And so I think one of the points we wanted to get across in this seminar is actually the importance of having your voices in various areas of science. Now, maybe let's think a little bit now about the post-pandemic world, because if this webinar had happened, a year ago, we would have just been talking about, yes, women in science and promoting that. But now we've put on this idea of a post-pandemic world. Let's maybe look at what we were saying differently than we would have said a year ago. Maybe a lot of it would be the same, but actually the pandemic has showed up a few things. So I'd love to hear from both of you how you think the pandemic has actually heightened some things or affected the fields that you're in. Yeah, maybe Sarah?
Yeah, so I think from a pure psychology perspective, all these lockdowns have really raised the issue with loneliness and isolation. And that not only has an effect on our mental health, but it also has a huge effect on our physical health as well. So, we've heard people talk about, loss of social connection, and we also have the anxiety and the uncertainty and potential, anticipatory depression around all of the challenges that we're facing and the uncertainty of how long this will go on for. I think what's been a good thing to come out of this pandemic and the conversations that are happening is that I'm seeing a lot more conversations about the importance of our mental health. Which for so long, seeking support with mental health has carried such a huge stigma, which it really shouldn't, yet it did. And so I'm really hoping in this, once the dust settles and once we're starting to get back to what we feel is a relatively normal life, that we're able to see much more emphasis on mental health support being a very normal part of life, just like you'd go to a medical doctor if you broke your leg. That if you feel things are not quite right for you, you're struggling or you're finding it difficult to really find joy in your life, that you would seek some mental health support. So that's what I'm predicting and hoping for as a result of the pandemic this year.
How do you think that will affect maybe even some of the research? Like, do you think what areas are people looking into maybe more?
Yeah, I think what you've got is suddenly a population who have potentially been through large trauma and small trauma due to this, on a global basis. So perhaps people are looking into like, how do different cultures deal with lockdowns? How do different cultures, there's been a lot of talk around the cultural expectation around wearing masks and following public health policy, and how that's been very different in the West compared to the East. These individualistic countries in the West, how what has really built in terms of growing their country and growing careers and doing really well there, has really been their downfall when it's come to people following instructions about wearing masks and social distancing, because it's well, you can't tell me what to do, I'm an individual. So the whole society and culture has really come under the microscope with this. So I would not be surprised to see more research along those lines. I also would not be very surprised to see research around how people have been impacted by the pandemic in whatever way, and how it's had an impact on our mental health. So, levels of things like anxiety, I would probably predict that they've increased, and perhaps people who hadn't really experienced severe anxiety before might have found they're experiencing this for the first time. Certainly from the education point of view, there are a generation of young people and children who have gone through remote learning for the first time that I've heard of, certainly, that the technology has allowed for. So there's a lot of talk, certainly in the UK, around needing to catch up and needing to catch up on the academics. And in fact, there's a big pushback from school leaders and from policymakers who are actually saying, what our children and what our young people need are to catch up on the lost opportunities, like interacting with friends, playing on teams for sports, the social side of things that really has taken a hit during the pandemic. So yeah, a few predictions there from me about where the research might go in the next few years.
Great, thank you. And Lakshmi, what are you seeing, or what your thoughts are on the pandemic?
Yeah, so I just happened to come across an article which is written by one of the professors from NUS, Chui Tek Lim. He's like a very well-known professor, and he has like also invented cool cancer diagnosis technology. So I was reading through his article, and I found that he has written something very relevant. So one of the things that he has actually brought in a quote by somebody else, which actually says, if you think research is expensive, then try disease. Because because the COVID-19 pandemic has really taught that, it is such an expensive deal, right? I mean, it's not just about like the money that is spent into coming up with all of these vaccines, not the money that's being spent into research, but the economic, depression that it's like really begun to cause. So it is, I think, really, really important to put in more money into research and science education, because one of the points that he has also stated is that, so, like for the benefit of everyone who's here, when you look at research, there are like research can be classified into two. One is like basic research, and there is translational research. Okay, so basic research is like all the underlying studies, whichever field it is, like all the basic studies that are needed. For example, if it is molecular biology, then it is studying the cellular mechanisms, and like Tara was talking about the development of an embryo and stuff like that. So when you talk about translational research or science, it is about taking the basic science into a product or something, like for example, vaccine. So see, for example, if you look at the diagnostic kits today, which is based on PCR has become such a commonly heard word, right? But PCR research was done like way back from in 1975, people had started working on sequencing. And then later on, it evolved into something like PCR in the 1980s or 90s. So it is really important to, I feel, invest in for countries and for, to invest more into research and to encourage more people to, especially like a diverse mixture of people, to take up research so that we are prepared. Because, although COVID-19 accelerated research during this time, it was really built on research that happened in the past. Right? It did not happen overnight. So it's important. So that's one thing. So I really clearly feel that there is a need to really invest in research and promote. scientific research. Of course, like I don't want to just, only talk about life science because it's COVID-19. We really think about climate change and all those other issues, food, scarcity, water, all of those things. If you really see, there is research that can actually change environmental, and then psychology. I cannot attest more to it, Sarah. It is so important. So one of the things that I also see that science careers will also focus on is perhaps, which I feel strongly and passionate about, is addressing the infodemic, wrong scientific information that is being spread. So we need people who have knowledge in science to, come up with mechanisms and, ways to really say that, hey guys, this is wrong, don't spread it. And, put tabs on this, like policy checks on spreading misinformation, which is really, really making it horrible. So yeah, so these are some of the things that I think will change or will need to change.
Yes.
Since the pandemic. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think, the reason why I mentioned thinking if this was given a year ago is, mental health, the environment, disease. These were topics that are on the radar of science and in the radars of, say, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals that the UN has, right? These are always going to be important for human beings. And I like your point, Lakshmi, that what prepares us to handle things now is the training and the capabilities before. I think what is important every time in science, like I think one of the things is we don't always know what's coming up ahead, but what we as scientists can be trained in is the scientific method, the way of taking thought, of being analytical, of actually having hypotheses, testing it out. It's this actual thinking mind that we have. So if you're a young girl thinking about, what is the science degree going to do? It is actually training you. It's giving you a tool in your tool belt that allows you to actually move into that space of tackling some of these challenges. Now it'll have different, you will go along it in different levels, whether you go to a PhD or not. That scientific thinking is the gift, actually. I'm curious now then what we would say to someone who right now is saying, oh, I like the sciences. I also like some other subjects. I'm not sure how I will, sort that out. What might you advise them as a first step?
I would probably look into the options of combining some of those interests. The option of pursuing a first degree that combines, some of the psychology with the hard science, for example. Like my first degree was purely psychology, but within that we covered so much biology and neuroscience that it was actually really helpful. So just to look at the content of, any further qualifications you might do, because although they may present as one thing, University A and University B can tackle them quite differently. So picking something that really appeals to all of your interests should be more possible, I would hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, isn't it, when you're in school and you're 15 and 16 and you feel like you're having to make decisions that are going to steer you in a certain direction for the rest of your life. And I remember getting that talk from our teachers at 14 doing GCSE options, saying, well, the choices you make now and what happens now, that's going to dictate how things are forever. And to an extent, that is the case. But things can always be changed. Things can be altered. You may start a degree subject and find that actually a related subject at the same university is more interesting for you and be able to switch over to that. So I think just having those options, researching those options and finding out what's out there, but also not being afraid to course correct slightly if you find that it's not originally what you thought, provided you're in a position to be able to do that, always helps.
Yeah. Yes. Anything you want to add to that, Lakshmi?
Yeah, I just feel that things have changed have changed a lot since we pursued science. Things have really changed a lot. Like as Sarah was saying, combinations. Students have the option of like taking different combinations that they like and seeing. And then recently, one of the student coaches I've had said something very interesting, which is like, today the career options are so different. I mean, like for them, even being a YouTube influencer or an Instagram influencer is a real career, beginning to be a real career choice. But to that, what I would say is that even to become that, you need to build on the expertise, right? Like, where is the content that you're going to share come from? So if it is like scientific content, or if it is something like that you really want to make a difference to, and as Sarah said, I would attest to that fact as well, that it's important to build on some qualifications first at the right time in life.
Yeah.
Then you're free to do whichever direction you want to move to, because we don't know about the right now. What to me, what is not very clear or certain about is the expiry date of these platforms. Like how long are people gonna be on it? We don't know. So if you build instead on your your interest, your qualification, still it may sound much more conventional, but it still is a sure shot and safe way to go about, I would say, from career wise, rather, and then you're free to play around with, just like we did.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think for science, especially on the more technical side, there's probably no getting away from going in deep. There will always need that, really specializing, getting the techniques down. Again, always being open to taking your expertise in different directions. So, whereas I did developmental biology and I used frogs as my model system first, then I went into embryonic stem cells, but I kept studying blood. That was the field that I was in. But stem cells was a big field at the time, so it was up and rising as I was getting into my postdoctoral fellowship. And that's what will happen for you guys as well, or as the people in the cusp of research now. Detection of viruses, or what do you call, surveying microbes, maybe. All these things are very relevant in a world where disease, surveillance is important. Our research directions can very much shift because of something becoming more and more prevalent. And I think we will see people definitely caring about viral vaccine work, looking at disease, and then also continuing on the work, I imagine, with, mental illness and how to treat it. I think that's still a lifelong long issue. And so I think you will see that as your careers move on, some of the circumstances around your life will influence some of your choices. Yeah. I would like to actually take a moment now to maybe look at some of the questions that have come in. I've actually seen some. And we have a question for Sarah. So, dear Dr. Sarah, can you recommend some books about psychology for secondary students to start discovering their interests and have some insights into this field in particular?
Yeah, I can. I actually would start with a book called Flourish by Martin Seligman. He is a researcher in the field of depression and has been for, oh my goodness, a long time, 40 years, 50 years. And he's really credited as the person who's founded positive psychology. So he has a really nice writing style. It's very conversational. It's very easy to understand. It's interesting, but he also covers some really interesting research concepts in that as well. So his book Flourish is all about the 5 pillars of well-being and what we need to really flourish and thrive in our lives. And that's a really nice way to start. You could go with more of the psychology textbooks. They tend to be a little bit drier. Could be that you'd be interested in that. But for my money, Martin Seligman has a great writing style. He's also written a book called Learned Optimism and one called Learned Helplessness, all about his work in depression and how people can learn to be more optimistic and shift their mood a little bit through the way they change their thinking. So he'd be my first recommendation as a starting point.
Wonderful, thanks. And we've got a question, the two of us, Lakshmi. Is it necessary for secondary students to have a portfolio in preparation for future science careers, more specifically the medical field? If yes, then how can we start preparing for it?
Good question, actually. Portfolio of science careers. So my answer to that would be to first do some kind of reflection on, again, going back to what your interests really are within science. So like I shared the wheel, if you just search on Google science career options, you can come up with all of these things. So have a look at it. But before you build a portfolio, spend some time on what is it that right now at this phase, what is it that really interests you? So from the science subjects that you've learned, see what are the things that interest you, and also from other subjects, which are the other subjects, like Sarah mentioned about statistics, because these are all great combinations, and they're not mutually exclusive. Actually, every scientific study needs statistics. So see what really interests you, and then you kind of like lay down what are your options. So you asked about medical field, right?
Yeah,
so medical field.
Is it necessary for secondary students to have a portfolio in preparation for future science careers?
Yeah, portfolio of careers, right? That's the perhaps the intent of the question, right?
I'm not sure, but so why don't you answer it with that understanding, and I'll try a different one.
Yeah. So this is the thing. So I feel that it is okay to have backup options, but it is more important, I feel, to really have clarity on what is exactly that you want to pursue, because having too many options also may confuse you, because it really helps to narrow down to like one or two and then pursue that. Otherwise it's just too much. So I would say have a know-how, but I wouldn't really recommend on really building a career portfolio per se. If what I'm guessing from the question is like having different career options.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I've got the question right, actually, but based on that, What do you think, Tara? Yeah.
I think they were, the way I read it is also is whether it's like we have to kind of show some research experience.
Okay. That's a different good way of looking at it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You can answer that then, Tara.
So I think, I've seen a lot of students do that. They go ahead and do a research internship at some of the institutes here. That's good for you to get exposure. If you win prizes, good for you. These are wonderful signs of your ability. Do that for the experience. But honestly, I guess getting into these medical schools is still going to be on your grades and your application material. Again, if we're thinking of going directly into medical school, that will be mostly the grades. I know people who go to medical school after having had their first degree. So again, it's not that they went in for the first degree, they've gone off, they worked a bit, and now they want to go back to medical school. That's actually possible too. And that involves maybe taking some supplementary classes, and then this is, I should say, probably going into the States for that education, but it is also possible to enter medical school a little later.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, we have another question for Sarah, which is, what are some of the intersectionalities you are seeing with psychology and other emerging areas in STEM? For example, the role of psychology or a psychologist in sustainability fields. To explore some of these new pathways, do I have to have a major in both psychology and the other field in question?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of these intersectionalities are actually sort of unofficial. They're not necessarily recognized that psychology plays a big part. I can't speak so much to sustainability. That's not an area of expertise for me, but certainly on the business side of things, and the kind of statistics side of things, there is a huge psychology impact there, because statistics, when it comes to human populations, that's obviously underpinned by motivation and, what keeps people healthy. And, there's all of this thing that plays into it. So I would say intersectionalities, they can be very clear. They might not be so clear. To answer the second part of that question, actually, which I think is more important, is do you have to have a major in psychology and the other field in question? What I would say is do your research into the field where you think you might like to end up working. Because if they're saying, okay, your kind of your basics for entry are a joint degree in psychology and sustainability, then you have your answer. You know, and just doing a bit of searching around that career should give you the answer to that. If there isn't a clear answer, so if they're saying, okay, so, you know, if you're going to move into sustainability, this is the degree subject you need to do, there's no mention of psychology, then it becomes a choice for you. And you can think, okay, do I want to put the psychology element in there? Depending on my university choices, will they allow that combination? Because some universities can't let you do specific combinations of subjects. It just doesn't work for them logistically. So I would say, yeah, do your research into the field where you want to work. Find out what you need as a basic entry level to actually get into that, get your first foot into that field, and then decide if you want to put psychology in or not. There is also, you don't necessarily have to do psychology with your first degree. There are plenty of options, postgraduate diplomas, master's degrees in different types of psychology that you don't necessarily need to have a psychology degree to do. You can do some supplementary work, as you said, Tara, beforehand. You might find that once you've worked in the field for a few years, that it would be an advantage to have some additional qualifications. So several ways to go about it, but as a first step, do your research, find out what you would need to actually be considered for a role in that field and go from there.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that, and especially around the area of what's essential for the role degree-wise, and then actually what experience makes up for it, actually, because actually as we go along our careers, sometimes the experience base is enough that we're credible you're credible in that field. We have another question here that says, if I'm a person who thrives on social interaction and hectic environments, which fields of work would you recommend are suitable for me? I like this question because it shows a certain self-awareness about yourself. It brings up an important point I wanted to make, which is about being aware of how you're wired, what you're excited by. And so here we have a person who thrives on social interactions, and maybe there's a reputation of us scientists being often quiet in a little research lab there. But we are social animals, and actually one point I wanted to make is actually in this world, we're way more social than perhaps generations ago. As an endeavor, we can't be isolated in our labs as a scientist. So this person thrives on social interaction and hectic environments. Which fields of work would you recommend are suitable for me?
Be a teacher. You just described teaching perfectly. Perfect person to teach. It is hectic all of the time. And on a serious note, like the social interaction teaching is fantastic because you have the social interaction with colleagues. You also have the interaction with your students, however old they are, and it's different depending on their age. What teaching did for me was allow me to move countries and to move to Singapore. So people often think about teaching in a local to a country system. Perhaps the opportunities are more limited there, but certainly teaching as a job allows you to work anywhere in the world. And you can certainly weave in STEM interests there, particularly in subject teaching or in research around teaching methodology. So that would be my 2 pence worth.
Okay. Lakshmi, what's your vote?
Yeah, so I can think of definitely, like program management and business development. Yeah, so program management, like administration within science, I think because of all the deadlines that you have to meet, it becomes you're literally on your toes. There are like constant deadlines. And of course, like you're managing big programs like the one that I'm managing right now, there are multiple opportunities for social interactions with the parties. And if you're looking for something even more challenging, then I would say business development is something within the science, something which I see as quite challenging, because what I see from my experience is often nowadays, like academic research also thrives on business industry partnerships, and and then you need like industry to come in, put in money into your program, and all these collaborations. So there are multiple aspects to it, like bringing in people, having those conversations, then having contracts in place, and then getting the team to execute it. So there are multiple angles to it, which involves a lot of social interaction, and at the same time, it is, I would say, more than hectic. I would like to use the word challenging. It's like quite challenging to be on these roles. Quite stimulating also for people who are looking for it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, I think these are great suggestions. I love it. Fantastic. We're looking to actually round up our conversation, and so I'd just like to kind of take it around the Zoom room, with the two of you, with this final question. What's one favorite idea that you would like the girls here to take away with regard to, our discussion today on science education in a post-pandemic world?
Do you want to go first, Sarah?
I was just about to ask you. I can go first. Yeah. So I think while we're seeing potentially very different landscape post-pandemic in terms of new routes to take, new careers, what will always stand you in good stead is having qualifications in the area where you want to progress. And the more qualifications you have, I think the more flexibility that gives you, both in terms of choices and in terms of your options and the paths you can take. So that would be, my qualifications have done so much for me and are continuing to do so much for me. And once you have them, that's it, they're done. So that would definitely be where I would be focusing energy on moving forwards, for sure.
Lovely. Yeah. Myself, I would say, just stating from my own experience, and I think it's quite relevant today, start with intentionality and goals, because you really need to know where you want to go when you, especially early on in your career. Start with that, but then go with the flow, because the pandemic has taught us also to really go with the flow sometimes, because if you're just too stuck to what your goals sometimes, and then with the life changes, you may find it very difficult to navigate. So having that flexibility, but at the same time having clear intention, I would say is a good balance with which you can easily move forward.
Yes, yeah. That sounds great. I would say don't do this alone. You have people that will walk alongside you as your mentors and your colleagues and your bosses. It's an endeavor that involves many people. Now, I think it's really important to get encouragement and support along the way, and feedback. You want to have a realistic picture of how you're actually doing at every phase of a career journey, and to actually welcome it. Be glad when someone tells you, hey, you might want to look at this. This is good for you, to change the way you're behaving in this way or whatever. Get feedback, because you want to almost always have this thermometer, like you're at the right temperature in your career. And I think I just sort of want to leave you with that as you go forward. And so, yes, I'd be happy to now hand over to Madhavi.
Can I request the host to please enable my video? Yeah, okay. I hope you can all see me now, bright and clear. Yeah, I think that was one beautiful discussion, wonderful discussion. I hope the youngsters here in the audience have enough insights and then enough action points to take back, to think about, to brew over. And then of course, like we shared the contact slide earlier, maybe we can flash it one more time, Piju. In case you want to reach out to the speakers directly, you can reach out on their profiles like what we had shared already. So I'm sure the speakers are more than happy to assist in whatever questions you have of them, and then of course related to the topic. So at the outset, I think I would want to thank all the speakers for sharing with us your valuable insights on how we can overcome the challenges posed by the pandemic. Of course, on many aspects, but learning science education is definitely the topic of today. So we have now come to the end of the webinar, and it has been a pleasure being with all of you today. I would first like to thank our wonderful speakers, Dr. Tara, Dr. Sarah, and Dr. Lakshmi, who have taken time out of their personal and professional schedules to be here with us today. It is a privilege to host you at this insightful webinar. I would also like to thank KeyNote Women Speakers and the US Embassy for their support of this event. And last but not the least, thank you participants for joining us today. We hope that the session was an interesting learning experience for you too. You can reach out to the speakers directly, like I already mentioned, and your perspective and feedback matters to us. So we would like to hear from you, and please do give us your feedback via the QR code, which is going to be flashed on the screen just now, or also on the link displayed in the chat box. So on that rather a happy note, have a great evening, and thank you for joining us. Thank you.